Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Subject Computer Application for 12th Standard C section. Last class we completed chapter 6 where we discussed the control structures. Now we are going to discuss the chapter number 7, looping structures. In this session we are going to discuss the following topics: looping structure, for loop, for each loop, while loop, and do while loop. So let's have a start our class with the first topic, looping structure. Of course, looping means iteration logics. It is an important feature of many programming languages including PHP. Looping structure is used to repeat a single statement or more than one statement more than one time. So looping means repeating a same instruction again and again and again till the condition is satisfied. So for repeating a group of statement or a single statement, we should mention a condition. Based upon the condition only, the number of times repetition is decided. In PHP, there are 4 types of looping statements or structures are used. One, for loop, another one is for each loop, third one is while loop, fourth one is do while loop. So in this 4 category, for each loop is available only in PHP. Now we will discuss these 4 type of loop structures one by one. Here we are going to see the first loop structure called for loop. So it is an important functional looping system which is used for iteration. Iteration means executing a group of statement or a single statement more than one time. When the programmer knows in advance how many times the loop should run. So for loop is a loop structure which can implemented when programmer know how many times the loop should run. So here in the diagram you can see a flow chart is displayed to understand the looping structure. These 2 circles represent the start and end of the program, and the rectangular boxes represent the control structure or statements. The diamond structure represent the condition. So the first circle represents the start of the program. After initializing some actions, based upon some condition, if the conditions are true, then this statement will execute. After executing the statement, at the end of this statement, the loop structure again go to the condition area and again check the condition either true or false. If the condition is true, then it will execute the same statement for second time. After executing the statement, it go to check the condition. So this process will execute more than one time again and again till the condition is false. If the condition is false, then it goes directly at the end of the loop. So this is the simple flowchart structure explanation about for loop. Here in this syntax you can see the loop structure starts here and the initialized value is I is equal to 0, where the condition is I less than 100. Of course, at the time of beginning the program, value of the I is 0. So here we check the condition I less than 100. So condition is true because value of the I is 0. Then the loop structure will execute and this statement will print on the screen, welcome to analysis. So after printing the statement, the another statement will execute called I++. Of course we know what is the plus operator. It is a increment operator which increment the value of the variable by 1. After incrementing the value of the I becomes 1. So the loop structure go to the condition area Here value of the I is 1 and the condition is 2 because it compare with the 100 with the less than operator. So again the statement will print, again the value of the I is incremented by 2 and again the loop structure go to the condition area. So this statement execute up to the value of the I becomes 100. So it means this statement is going to print number of times 100 times. So 100 times this statement is going to print because the counting starts from 0 and the condition is known that 100 is the condition, that is number of times should we know here. So this is the loop called for loop, which we already discussed in the definition called the for loop definition. So advanced how many loop. So programmer known in advance how many times the loop should run. So then he mentioned the value here. So here the programmer mentioned 100 times. It means this loop statement is going to run for 100 times. So the here we understand the concept of looping. Now we are going to discuss the syntax. So here you can see the syntax for loop. Here you can see the keyword for. After that, within the parentheses there are three parts are here. The first part is called initialize part, the counter where initialize is here. Second part is called test counter. Here we mention the condition. The third part is the increment. So if you see the flow chart, you can see I is equal to 0 is the initialize part, I less than 100 is the test counter, and I plus plus is the increment operator. All these parts are available in all type of for loop structures, but the arrangement of this element will differ. So in each and every loop there should be a initialize counter, there should be test counter, there should be increment or decrement counter. So initialize counter, test counter and increment counter are the essential parts of all loop. In for loop they are arranged in this structure. So here we want to mention the initialize value of the variable which controls the loop. Here we may want to mention the condition. Here we want to mention the increment or decrement. After giving these three parts, we can separate these three parts by using the semicolon. This is the rule here. After giving this initialize, test counter and increment part, we can open the group by using a symbol called open open brace. Within the open and close brace we can mention the statement of iteration or statement of loop. So init counter is the initialized loop, initial the counter value, test counter evaluate every iteration of the loop. If it evaluates to true, the loop continues. If it evaluates to false, then loop ends. If the test counter becomes true, then these statements between these parentheses will execute. If the test counter is false, then the loop will terminate. Increment counter will increase the counter variables value. So now we are going to understand this concept by using a simple example demo17.php. So in Notepad I am going to open a program which already written, namely demo17.php. First we understand the source program, after that we try to understand the output. So open the demo17.php, very small program using for loop. So as usual, by using the open close php tag we create a file, and within that statement we use only a for loop structure. So here we use a variable called I which controls the loop. So at the beginning of the loop you can see the initial part where the initial value is 0, and the condition part where the condition is mentioned I less than or equal to 10. An increment part we use to increment the value of the I. It means the loop starts from 0 and end at the point where the value of I becomes 11. It means it's going to run for 11 times, and each and every time the value this loop is going to print the statement within this open and close parentheses. There is only one statement called the number is, and we are going to print the value of I. So we know how many times the loop is going to run because we know we mentioned the condition here, that is the 10. Now we are going to open the WAMP server and try to see the output of this program demo17.php. We display the statement more than one time, that is 11 times, using for loop. So here I am going to open the output of this program demo17.php. So you can see the output. The number is 0, the number is 1, the number is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and here the loop terminates when the value of I becomes 11. So at the starting value of the I is 0, and each and every time whenever the iteration execute, the value of I will incremented by this increment value, and each and every time the iteration execute, this condition is evaluated. If the condition is true, then only the statement between these parentheses will execute. If the statement is false, then it terminates the loop. So here you can see at the 12th time when the iteration try to execute, this statement becomes false because the value of the I is 11. So 11 is not less than or equal to 10. So that's why this condition is false. So very simple loop statement, for loop, which will help for programmer in many writing many complex programs. Now we are going to discuss the second loop structure called for each loop. Of course, I already told you, we must mention the initial value, condition, and increment value for every for loop structure. But here you can see a different for loop that is called for each loop. Is exclusively available in PHP. It works only with arrays. The loop iteration depends on key value pair in the array. Of course, we know for each and every array we created, there should be a key value for each and every element in that array. By using that array key value, this loop is going to execute. That is, for each loop should only execute in array variables. So of course, when you declare a array, we can add number of element. So the number of element is going to be the condition, and it starts from the first array to last array. So in this diagram you can see a array is created, namely seq, and there are three elements. For each and every time whenever the array seq is accessed by for each loop, the element of that first element of that array is stored in the variable x, and it was printed on the screen, that is 18. And second time when it goes to second element, then it accesses the second element. So this will execute again and again till the number of elements available in the array. If there was no array element, then the loop is not going to execute. It means we know how many times to run the loop because the element which we already stored in the array is well known by the program, and we know where to start because each and every element is accessed through a key which starts from 0. So we know how to access array. So this is the three important thing. Number one, initial value. Initial value is taken from the first element of the array, and end value or condition which is taken from the last element of the array. Increment is the default element where each and every time the iteration executed, the increment of the array values increased. So now here you can see the syntax for each element, where we should not where we don't want to mention these three elements directly. Indirectly we can mention here as the array name as x value. So array name as value. So based upon this number of element, all three, the requirement of any loop is accessed through this array. Now we are going to understand this for each loop which execute only in array variables using the program demo18.php. So very simple program which explains us about the for each loop. So here you can see array variable is created, namely student underscore name, and number of elements are 5 element. Each element are separated by comma. Magilan, Inian, Nilani, Sibi and Shini are the elements of this array student name. So we are going to access this element true for each loop. So here we mention as per syntax student name array variable name as value. So we use this value for access the element of array variable. So each and every time whenever a loop start, it starts from the first element, it accesses the first element and display on the screen, and it go to the second and third and fourth, fifth, and each and every time this statement is execute more than one time, and when the loop reaches at the last element of the array, then it terminates because it know there is no element. So after that it going the execution of the for each loop is not acceptable, or it cannot execute after last element. So now I'm going to execute the program demo 18.php. Here you can see Magilan, Inian, Nilani, Sibi, all the 5 elements will display on the screen. So if you remove any one of the element, for example, now I'm going to remove 2 elements from this array. So now the number of elements are 3, and after saving the source program, when you try to refresh the program, you can see only 3 elements will display on the screen. It means for each loop will consider Nilani as the first element because it was placed at the first of the array list. So if you remove all the elements, consider if you remove all the elements from the array, you have created an empty array. When you try to run the program which access the array element, you can see there was no access. It means for each loop is not executed for not a single time because in array variable there are no elements. So the elements of array gives the detail about the initial value, gives the detail about the counter variable, gives the detail of the increment for each loop. So that's why if there is no element, then for each loop is not going to execute. So I hope you understand this loop for each loop, and you can understand very well about the difference between for loop and for each loop. In for loop, we try to access and give the manual reference for initial test and increment counter, whereas in for each loop there is no need to mention initial counter condition and increment value because all these values will access through array variable elements. Now we are going to discuss the third loop structure called while loop. Of course, here also we want to mention 3 component for loop. One is initialize, see here. Second is condition. Third one is updation. Here updation means increment or decrement. The only difference is arrangement of this value. For in for loop, all the elements are arranged in a single line within the parentheses, but in while loop they are arranged in different manner. So before we start the while loop, we want to mention the initialize part. After at the time of while loop, we want to mention the condition. At the end of the while loop, we want to mention the updation or increment value. So see the syntax, while condition is true, then only this can execute the code between this block, that is open and close curly braces will going to execute. Now I am going to open the file demo 19 where we are going to discuss the while loop of PHP. So demo 19.php. So here you can see student underscore count is equal to 10, student underscore number is equal to 1. We created 2 variable, one for the end of the loop, another one for increment of the start of the loop. So student number is equal to 1, it means it is the initial value, on count means number of time this loop is going to execute, which we describe here. So in condition area in while loop, you can see we mentioned the condition student number less than or equal to student count, and we declare the number of statement. The student number is 1, and we use to increment operator here for incrementing the value of the control variable of while loop. The same procedure, the same uh, execution rules are applied here. So now I'm going to open the demo 19.php. So here you can see the number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. All the data are printed here. So if you want to start the loop from 0, then you should change the student is equal to number is equal to 0. If you now, after saving this source program, if you refresh, you can see the students is starts from 0 and here at 10. If you want to increase or decrease the number of time, you can mention the number of time in the variable student underscore count, because in condition area we compare the student number and student count. That's why we can mention the values here. Now you can see starting is 0, that is student number is 0 and student count is 5. So the loop is executed for 6 times. So each and every time whenever the iteration will executed, the plus plus operator will increment the student underscore number variables value by 1. So it is simple like for loop. So now we are going to discuss the fourth loop of PHP called do while loop. The only difference between while loop and do while loop is the condition arrangement is vary. Here you can see do while loop starts here and condition is mentioned at the end of the loop. So it means the statement which was declared inside the do while loop is going to execute at least once, either the condition is true or false. But in for loop, for each loop and for while loop, in while loop, the loop statement will execute only when the condition is checked, because the after checking the condition, the condition if the condition is true, then only the iteration statement will execute in above discussed loop statement. But in do while loop, the condition is placed at the end of loop structure. That's why if the condition is false, then also the code or loop statement will execute only once. So this is the difference between do while loop and while loop. Now we are going to understand this program do while loop using the program demo 20.php. So in this program you can see the same control structure variables are used here. So count starts from 1 and end at the 0, but the difference is, and in while loop here we mention the condition, but in do while loop we mention the condition at the end of the loop. So we mention the do and we use the increment operator as usual. So when we run this program, you can see the output same as while loop, but we will see the difference. So here you can see the same output which we see before in this program. Now when I change the condition value to 11, for example, if the starting value is 11 and count value is 10, then the condition is false, but here you can see the loop statement executed once, because the condition is checked at the end of the loop. So in the same way, when you open the demo 19.php file, and here when you mention the value 11 and the count value as 10 and try to execute the demo 19.php file, you cannot see the output. So open the WAMP server, open the demo 19.php file. Here see, when I change the start value as 11 and count value as 10, then the condition becomes false at the time of starting the loop. Then loop terminates and it does not execute any statement within the loop structure. So But when you run the same condition in the program demo 20, where we use the do while loop, after the condition is false, but the statement is executed once because condition is evaluated at the time of executing or end of the loop. That's why in do while loop, condition is either true or false, there is no matter, but the statement will execute at least once. But in other loops like for loop, for each loop, and while loop, conditions are evaluated at the beginning of the loop structure, and the loop statement will execute only when the condition is true. If the condition is false, then the loop statement is not going to execute. So I hope you understand very well what is the concept discussed here. So try this program in your system. If you have any doubt, contact me through WhatsApp. Clear all your doubts. Prepare well for your public examination. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Prepare the question answers for book back exercises.